The metals for our future, they're in what is known as international waters.
In the early hours of June the 21st, 2012, Charles Morgan received an email that he had been eagerly waiting for. It was an email from an employee of the International Seabed Authority, who he had contacted a few days before.
Charles, here is the entire reserved area data. This is supposed to be classified data and not to be disclosed to others. I am sure you will use for your resource analysis and nothing else. See you next month.
The casual tone of the email makes it hard to fully comprehend the significance and long-term implications of what's going on here. The ISA, or International Seabed Authority, is an agency affiliated to the United Nations that regulates the international seabed. The data being shared is about the areas in the ocean floor that are the most valuable in terms of metals that could be potentially mined. So the information is extremely valuable. It's basically a summary of the most profitable areas in the ocean. If Charles Morgan's company, Nautilus, successfully mined these areas, it could lead to billions of dollars of profits, but also in unprecedented environmental destruction. This is a story about international agencies, corruption, and corporate capture. It's a story that takes place at the meeting point between underfunded public agencies and corporate lobbying. It's also a story that might shape the future of an emerging industry with unknown environmental impacts: deep sea mining. In 2022, the New York Times published hundreds of emails, letters, and other internal documents related to this agency and its dubious practices. We already saw how in June 2012, Charles Morgan received an email with information about the most valuable areas in the ocean. As the employee of the Seabed Authority himself highlighted, this data is supposed to be confidential. However, that didn't stop them. In the initial email asking for the data, we see that Charles Morgan asked to get this information again, which clearly indicates that this wasn't the first time. Indeed, a letter from 2007 from the CEO of Nautilus, the deep sea mining company, made clear that the ISA, or International Seabed Authority, had shared before data about the most profitable areas in the ocean in terms of presence of metals.
Dear Secretary General, thank you for providing Nautilus with the opportunity to review data pertaining to the ISA's reserved areas,
wrote the CEO of Nautilus, David Hayden. This man then went on to ask the agency to reserve 75,000 square meters of seabed for his company. These areas matched almost exactly an internal document by the International Seabed Authority that listed the ocean areas with the highest amount of minerals. The letter specified that the company was after polymetallic nodules. Polymetallic nodules are rocks that can be found at the bottom of the ocean. These rocks contain metals such as nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese, minerals critical for manufacturing batteries and electric vehicles. These rocks are at the core of the hype around the deep-sea mining industry, so remember this term because it will come up again. In any case, sharing that information angered the agency's own employees, who were aware that the data was not meant for mining companies. As the agency itself clarified in a public statement in the year 2000, detailed data was not supposed to be shared outside the organization.
You are violating the legal concept behind the Seabed Authority. It's scandalous,
said an old employee of the agency. However, these emails sharing data are only one way in which the ISA has been involved in problematic actions. These emails are just the tip of the iceberg. This is a 2018 promotional video by Deep Green, a deep-sea mining company now rebranded as the Metals Company.
We're on a quest for a more sustainable future, and we need metals to get there.
It's a classic promotional piece. It has all the familiar elements: inspirational music, bold visions for the industry's future, and captivating visuals. The video is rather ordinary and predictable until a new face enters the picture. Michael Lodge, the Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority.
Deep Green has a contract with the International Seabed Authority. It has to be sponsored by a state that is a party to the law of the sea.
Michael Lodge's appearance in the video surprised everyone in the field. Why? At the time, the metals company was looking for investors, so getting the Secretary General of the agency to appear in their promotional video would be a big selling point. Moreover, his statements didn't seem particularly neutral.
Land-based resources are becoming increasingly difficult to access. We've taken the best resources already. Future resources are in more remote places, which means it's more expensive to recover them.
Let's stop here for a moment. This is the person that is in charge of the organization that is supposed to be protecting ocean ecosystems and of regulating deep-sea mining activities. And he is appearing in a promotional video of a company that he's supposed to be regulating. But this lack of neutrality seems a common trend for Michael Lodge.
Land-based resources are becoming increasingly difficult to access. We have taken the best resources already,
said Lodge in a speech to a business group.
I am disturbed by the fact that popular perception of deep seabed mining is increasingly subject to wildly inaccurate and distorted scenarios portrayed by some sections of the media and interest groups,
he added. That's a pretty wild statement, to say the least. Scientists have repeatedly warned that mining the seabed could cause irreversible damage. They warn that deep-sea mining could release toxic substances into the ocean, which would kill marine life and end up in the food chain. In other words, mining the seabed releases toxic substances, fish then eat these substances, and then we eat those fish. And this is only one of the problems of deep-sea mining. Mining activities may also destroy the seafloor and the habitats of many marine species. So having the Secretary General of the ISA making these statements, casually ignoring the evidence around deep-sea mining, is a problem. If these were statements by a business person that is trying to mine the seabed, it wouldn't be surprising. The problem is the ISA is a public agency linked to the United Nations that is supposed to be neutral and to protect the ocean. Yet, Lodge's disdain for science seems a trend at the ISA. In 2017, in an email, he openly questioned whether the agency really needed a marine geologist. Taking into account that marine geology is quite an important aspect when you're talking about mining the ocean, that's quite a curious approach. So how did we get to this point? Why the ISA and Lodge seem to have sided with mining companies and abandoned neutrality? Get ready, the story is about to get much bigger. Now it's time we focus our attention on one of the most important actors in this story. That's Gerard Barron, CEO of the metals company and Deep Green. In a few years, the metals company and Gerard Barron have become the reference in the field. They lobby international organizations, they speak at official meetings, they trade in Nasdaq, they appear in all kinds of news and documentaries. Now, I won't develop on the biography of Gerard Barron, but he's quite an interesting figure. He invested heavily in Nautilus Minerals, the company involved in the email scandal, and also the company that eventually went bankrupt due to failed projects, particularly in Papua New Guinea. Then he invested in Deep Green, and he eventually became the CEO. Remember, he was the man that appeared in the beginning of the promotional video. Later on, Deep Green became the metals company. In October 2017, Gerard Barron sent an email to Michael Lodge. First of all, I think it's important to highlight the familiar tone of the email.
Hi, Michael. Your cousin is fabulous in every way. What a special lady. Greg Stone has been such a delight to get to know as well. What a legend.
But the important point came later. Gerard Barron wanted to explain his plans for the company. He explained that he had stopped his company's stock market debut and that was actually related to his plans with the ISA.
We want to assist in getting this very delicate legislation in place, and keeping that out of the public eye will be of benefit to us all, I feel.
So let's break this down. When he speaks of very delicate legislation, he refers to the mining code, the legislation that the ISA is supposed to prepare to regulate deep-sea mining activities. In other words, what Gerard Barron is saying here is that they are trying to influence the law that is supposed to be regulating them. Then, he mentions that they want to keep that legislation out of the public eye, which will benefit them all, according to the email. So, in other words, he knew that if he made the company public, if he made the company went to trade on Nasdaq, he would be more on the spotlight, and that was a bit of a risk. The level of influence of Gerard Barron and the metals company on the ISA seems to be quite insane. In 2018, Lodge hosted a closed-doors dinner at a fancy restaurant with several mining executives, including, you guessed it, Gerard Barron, CEO of the metals company. In a 2021 agency meeting, Gerard Barron was among a group of business people who freely mingled with international delegates while discussing agenda items, including his company's own request. He also appeared on the official channel of the ISA promoting his approach to mining.
The world is now only starting to think about what the impact of collecting metals for the green transition is. The ocean is the absolutely right place to go to find these metals.
And in a session in 2019, he even spoke during an official session of the ISA Council representing the country of Nauru. That's right, Gerard Barron used Nauru's seat to present his company's business plan and advocate for deep-sea mining. Speaking from Nauru's seat, he addressed the rest of government delegates, saying,
Personally, I get uncomfortable when people refer to us as deep-sea miners. At Deep Green, we don't view ourselves as developing a mining business.
To be clear, companies are not supposed to participate at the ISA's council sessions. They are obviously not governments and they cannot qualify for observer status because that's reserved for NGOs and international agencies. Yet, Gerard Barron seems to feel at home within the ISA. Interestingly, in this interview with a specialized mining page, you can see how Gerard Barron was actually in the office of the ISA. It's almost like if their office was his co-working space. The interview was just a general overview about the metals company's operations and ambitions, nothing special. But it was quite funny because he had a couple of Freudian slips.
That's where I am now in Kingston, Jamaica, because we're making great progress on the mining code. We uploaded to the OBIS database 2 weeks ago. In fact, the International Seabed Authority uploaded our data.
Some former employees accused the ISA of being submissive towards the companies it is supposed to be regulating.
The current organizational dynamics have resulted in frustration, resentment, and made the workplace an unpleasant and often toxic place to be,
concluded a management consultant in 2018 after interviewing 31 staff members.
Breakdowns in communication, lack of transparency, fear of retaliation, not feeling valued, nepotism, clashing personalities, inconsistent application of policies, and often uncertainty around direction and vision, among other things, have contributed to the current state,
said the analysis. The close ties with mining companies contributed to this toxic and unpleasant work environment.
There were times that you were just told to sit down, shut up, and do what you're told,
said an employee. But employees said that there was no way of announcing what was going on.
There's no internal hotline, whistleblower hotline,
said Andrew Webster, then a senior executive. This lack of transparency and the close ties with mining companies have, perhaps unsurprisingly, led to laws that are more favorable to mining companies than to the public interest. So far, mining regulations seem to be very favorable to the industry. For instance, a key issue when it comes to deep-sea mining is how much companies should pay to the countries that are near the mining operations. At the ISA, so far, they have proposed a rate of 2% of the metal's value. This is based on private sector arguments about the need for a low rate to make sure that they get a high return for their investment. So, after getting to know the current state of this agency, I think it's worth asking what happened. What are the origins of this agency and who gave it the right to control the seabed? It all began with an idealistic speech. It was 1967 when Arvid Pardo, a delegate from Malta, took the stage at the United Nations. He delivered an outstanding, impassioned speech, declaring that the oceans should be utilized for the exclusive benefit of mankind as a whole. At this period in history, technology was advancing rapidly, making the extraction of resources from the deep sea a realistic possibility. This situation ignited a global dilemma about how to manage these resources, because the deep sea was essentially no man's land. Pardo firmly believed that the minerals from the deep sea should not only profit the privileged few, but also poorer nations. He famously argued that the oceans and their resources should be managed as the common heritage of mankind. He also argued that if mining were to occur, it should not damage the environment. Pardo's powerful discourse eventually led to various international agreements, most notably the United Nations Law of the Sea and the establishment, you guessed it, of the International Seabed Authority. Even today, in the Law of the Sea, we can read that the ocean and its resources are the common heritage of mankind. Yet, as we have seen, this is not really what happened with the ISA. The agency ended up being hostage of a few mining companies with close ties to the Secretary General. So, what happened? The International Seabed Authority operated in relative tranquility and obscurity for years from its headquarters in Kingston, Jamaica. Created in 1994 under the United Nations Law of the Sea, it seemed that there wasn't much work initially. However, concerns about climate change have dramatically accelerated the production of batteries and electric vehicles. These products don't need oil but another key resource: metals. Nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, and other minerals that you can actually find under the sea. The International Energy Agency says the need for these resources might increase by a huge 600% in the next 2 decades. Of course, this has prompted great interest in deep-sea mining, and now the ISA is in the situation in which it still has a small team of less than 50 people, but is in charge of regulating a field that could potentially be worth billions of dollars. Think about it, oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface. Parts of the ocean seabed are so inaccessible that have never been explored. In fact, we know less about the ocean floor than we do about the surface of Mars. And yet, the ISA can give you the right to explore and mine a good chunk of the ocean seabed. So there's a huge imbalance here, a small agency with limited resources to do its work, and a few companies with lots of resources and a lot of incentives to try to manipulate it. So what happened at the ISA? Why companies, and specifically the metals company, seem to have such a huge influence on it? All this can be understood under the concept of corporate capture.
Corporate capture is a form of corruption that occurs when the private industry uses its political influence to take control of the decision-making apparatus of public authorities.
The ISA was supposed to defend the public interest, but has instead evolved into an organization that is supporting and advancing the business interest of the industry it is meant to regulate. And that's obviously at odds with the mandate to protect the ocean for the benefit of humankind.
The ISA is not fit to regulate any activity in international waters. It is like to ask the wolf to take care of the sheep,
said Sandor Mulsov, a marine geologist who worked at the authority for more than 5 years. This is a story of persistent lobbying of the ISA, which, despite its huge responsibility, remains a small agency in Jamaica. It was a long-term strategy of almost 20 years to build good relationships with the agency and persuade them to create a legal framework beneficial to companies. They dedicated time and resources to this, and it worked.
These revelations underscore the inherent conflicts of interest that have pervaded the International Seabed Authority and the need for a truly international oversight body,
said Christina Gerard, a high seas policy advisor at an NGO. In any case, how has Michael Lodge, the Secretary General of the ISA, responded to this criticism? Lodge has publicly accused critics of misunderstanding his work and exaggerating the potential impacts of mining. At a conference in 2021, he talked of
a growing environmental absolutism and dogmatism bordering on fanaticism.
Previously, he had dismissed concerns raised by scientists and NGOs, saying that the consequences of mining were predictable and manageable. But that's not really true. A team of 31 deep-sea scientists conducted an exhaustive review of all available research in 2022 and concluded that there is no adequate scientific data to handle this topic. According to the authors, our current knowledge is even too limited to develop a policy framework. In response to this criticism, Lodge simply said the following:
Everybody in Brooklyn can say, I don't want to harm the ocean, but they sure want their Teslas.
That's why in 2020, Radio New Zealand went to the point of calling Lodge a cheerleader for mining interests. Diplomats from several countries believe that Michael Lodge, that is supposed to be a neutral facilitator, has gone too far. Germany has expressed serious concern over the fact that Lodge has actively opposed countries that were proposing a moratorium on deep-sea mining.
This goes beyond what should be a decision of the Secretariat. The Council is formed from member states, and we are the ones in charge, and the Secretary General has administrative functions,
said a representative of Costa Rica about the Seabed Authority. The countries are supposed to be the decision makers, and the ISA is supposed to have the role of implementing those decisions, not the other way around. That's probably why, only a few weeks ago, something happened. Lodge lost his position. July 2024 was a key date in the ISA's history. In July 2024, member states had to vote who would be the next leader for the next 4 years. Taking into account the controversial actions of the agency and the billions of dollars at stake, it was not going to be an easy choice. Some countries are completely opposed to the idea of mining the deep sea, while other countries have partnered with mining companies. Michael Lodge had been in power since 2016 and aimed to secure a third term. His opponent was Letícia Carvalho, an oceanographer and former oil industry regulator from Brazil. Lodge aimed to rush regulations and allow mining to take place as soon as late 2024. Carvalho called for a more transparent and deliberative approach, arguing that several years may be needed to write the rules. However, it's not like Carvalho is against deep-sea mining. While Brazil has supported a 10-year moratorium, for instance, she has declared her opposition to this stance. Due to their different approaches and the polarization among countries about what to do about deep-sea mining, this was already quite an intense election. But things got even more intense in May 2024. In the midst of the campaign, a former Seabed Authority executive filed a complaint against the United Nations. Michael Lodge was being accused of misusing agency's funds. From January to May, Lodge traveled to several countries with ISA funds. Some critics saw it as campaigning with public money.
He's clearly campaigning, using the machine of the Seabed Authority as part of his campaign,
said Carvalho. Moreover, supporters of the two candidates accused each other of payments to help secure votes. See, countries with delayed payments are not allowed to vote, and it seems that the ISA was offering to reduce the payments of those states favorable to Lodge. Adding to the whole mess, an ambassador of a country that supports Lodge, Kiribati, offered Carvalho to drop out in exchange of a high position at the Seabed Authority. Lodge and his team denied misusing agency funds or trying to influence the election.
You have a collation of vague, unsubstantiated, unfounded, and anonymous rumors, gossip and hearsay which are demonstrably untrue, lack any foundation of fact or evidence, and do not stand up to any objective scrutiny,
said Lodge in a statement. Yet, Kiribati's ambassador confirmed that he had offered a job to Carvalho, and that Lodge was aware of it.
We don't want someone to come in and break what ISA is trying to do,
he said. Finally, in the big day, the stance of countries was clear. In the final vote, Letícia Carvalho was elected by a 79-34 vote, the end of an era. To end this video, I would like to step back and reflect on some of the causes of the corporate capture of the ISA. I think it's important to think about the types of contexts in which this kind of things occur, and now that there's a new leader at the ISA, maybe it's a time to reflect. There are several factors to take into account, including lack of funding and capacity, disregard for environmental evidence, structural flaws, and bad leadership. Let's start with lack of funding and capacity. Imagine having jurisdiction over 71% of the Earth's surface, being under massive pressure from countries and international companies, and having to develop from scratch the world's first regulations of deep-sea mining in international waters. Now imagine doing that while operating on a small budget of $10 million and a workforce of only 50 employees. To compare, the World Health Organization has a budget of $6.7 billion. That means that the ISA has 0.15% of their budget. This lack of adequate funding inevitably limits the agency's capacity to carry out its responsibilities, and that made it susceptible over time to being corrupted by companies that offered at least some financial and technical capacities. In fact, a former finance officer said the following:
"The organization simply does not have the capacity necessary to perform such functions. What they care about is their own benefit, and corruption is everywhere.
Another key factor is the disregard for environmental data and evidence. A recent analysis of the ISA's process of assessing environmental impacts found it to be severely deficient, both in procedure and in substance. The study was the work of scientists and legal experts from 11 nations. There's a little anecdote that helps to portray this lack of regard for environmental science. At some point, the Legal and Technical Commission of the agency advised to allow an exploration contract in the Atlantic Ocean without even noticing that the area had been identified by another body of the United Nations as ecologically and biologically sensitive. The proposed mining zone was next to the so-called Lost City, a unique site under the sea protected as a World Heritage Site. To put another example, a review of the data provided by companies revealed that for every 4,000 square miles that these companies had explored, they had provided only one biological sample.
It is like going into Central Park in New York with a soda straw, taking one sample and then trying to tell me how many worms are in all of the park,
said Mulsov, a former employee. That's why 2 former members of the ISA accused the agency of failing to do basic environmental supervision. To this accusation, an employee of the ISA simply replied that
it is not the function of the ISA Secretariat to make qualitative judgments in respect of this environmental data and food.
This response is pretty concerning. It's basically like saying, we don't care about the quality of the data, simply send me whatever data you have and we will check the box. Lodge has actually declared explicitly that he doesn't care about how mining companies conduct the research.
I want to emphasize that I, personally, do not have major concerns about the performance of companies.
He told mining executives at a private meeting in 2018, according to Los Angeles Times. There are also structural flaws in the way that the ISA was conceived and established. For instance, the lack of a dedicated environmental department within the organization made it difficult to actually address environmental issues. Meanwhile, the Legal and Technical Commission, one of the main departments of the ISA, has been accused of a lack of transparency. They always meet behind doors. The fact that some of its members also have worked for mining companies certainly doesn't help. The ISA was also supposed to have a unit dedicated to the needs of developing countries. This was important because the ISA's mandate was to create a fair playing field for countries in the global south, but this never happened. Finally, the agency's financial controls have also come under fire. 3 former employees pointed to the fact that in 2017, budget oversight was contracted out to a Hong Kong company that produces proteins from insects. The ISA is associated with the United Nations, but the United Nations doesn't really keep a close watch on the authority, the budget, or the Secretary General. Speaking of which, the final factor that facilitated corporate capture is bad leadership. Michael Lodge has been at the ISA pretty much since its creation, and he's certainly a dedicated person with a passion for the topic. But his approach and his actions have raised many red flags, indicating poor leadership. As we have seen, Lodge's close relationship with companies that would directly benefit from his decisions have raised eyebrows, to say the least. Accusations have been made that he has allowed early access to essential information to companies, giving them an unfair advantage. Remember the emails at the very beginning of the video? At the time, Michael Lodge was not the Secretary General of the ISA but the legal counsel, and he was the one who actually suggested to share the data with the companies. In an email to colleagues, he explained that if they published summaries of the data publicly, then they would have an excuse to send the whole database to the company. Since they had made the summaries public, he reasoned the agency could share the rest of the data. Even though the mandate of the ISA is to protect the ocean, Michael Lodge has mocked environmental groups, minimizing their concerns and calling them propagandists. In the meanwhile, employees have been allegedly told to keep quiet and follow orders, creating a sort of fear culture within the Seabed Authority. Pardo argued that oceans had to be protected and that their resources had to be regarded and managed as the common heritage of mankind. However, in this video we have seen how the ISA has not lived up to the expectations of our big partner. The agency has been constantly understaffed and underfunded, and their close ties with mining companies have raised concerns about its commitment to protecting the oceans. As a former employee said,
"The ISA is not fit to regulate any activity in international waters. It is like to ask the wolf to take care of the sheep."
So, what should be done? Obviously, now there's a new Secretary General, and that will help a lot. But beyond that, there is a need for more transparency and also for more supervision from the United Nations. We should also ask ourselves, who gets a say in deep-sea mining? To address the social impacts of deep-sea mining, it's important to involve a wide group of people in the process. Right now, the main actors involved are countries, mining companies, and some observers. But groups directly affected by deep-sea mining should also have a voice. They should be represented in these institutions. These may include fishing communities and industries, indigenous people, and young people, who would be the most affected by long-term environmental impacts, but also scientists and experts without conflicts of interest. This way, maybe, one day we can accomplish the original vision, a healthy ocean for the benefit of all humankind.